Hey, good morning, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. It is Thursday, February 22nd, and the day after NVDA earnings pull this thing back out of this large downside leg and back up over 10% into a new all-time high pre-market here. So, huge run off those NVIDIA earnings, which pulled everything back to bullish territory. The S&P 500 actually tagged a new all-time high after yesterday's continuous upside action on NVIDIA earnings, as well as pre-market here, right? That upside momentum did continue, and here we are right now. NVIDIA at highs, S&P at highs, NASDAQ not so much at highs, but surged very aggressively on what had transpired yesterday, right? The chip giant again surpassed expectations with its Q4 results, with AI accounting for about 40% of its data service or data center revenue last year, and during the earnings call, executives detailed an exhaustive list of companies and industries embracing as generative AI, providing a never-ending deluge of demand, accelerated computing, and generative AI have hit the tipping point, said CEO Jensen Huang, and demand is surging worldwide across companies and nations. Auto, health, robotics, financial services, multi-billion-dollar industries are now embracing our generative AI. The thing with NVIDIA, right, the revenue and the earnings per share grew like 200% year over year. Massive quarterly beats, and the expected climb has rightfully placed it in third in terms of market cap amongst the largest companies in the US, right? NVIDIA's upside caused the S&P, you can see the SPY over here, pumped back into a new high after yesterday's strong close. NASDAQ as well, pushing away those fears of pull down. NASDAQ popped again really aggressively, creating slightly, right? It hasn't necessarily hit a new all-time high, but it's creating slightly lower highs here on this pop. But wow, what a gap that is. Now, will this gap necessarily be sustained, right? That's another question that we're going to see today. Now, I expect to see some kind of battling of resistance in the S&P 500 futures and the NASDAQ. I'll give you guys some levels towards the end of this. But first, before we jump into that and the expected movement here, let's talk about Japan. Japan and the Nikkei, what was it? The Nikkei 225, right? It took over 30 years, but trading floors across Tokyo today erupted and applauded at the end of the market session. The Nikkei 225, Japan's main stock index, closed at a new all-time high above that 39,000 marker following a record run seen during the country's late 1980s asset bubble. So in fact, the Nikkei is the world's best performing major index in 2024, surging about 17.5% only in 2 months into the year, which beats out the impressive run of the S&P 500, that's up 5%. So what happened here? Why is it running so hot? Many factors come into play, with many seeing a new era for Japanese markets. A falling yen and fading promise of China have lured foreign investors like Warren Buffett, for example, and Berkshire Hathaway, and boosted earnings of heavyweight exporters. Additional bright spots have been also the corporate governance changes that have sent stock buybacks soaring, while excessive cash balance sheets have declined, as well as strategic cross-holdings between conglomerates. So it also comes amid optimism that Japan has finally escaped from the doldrums of deflation and big industry that has been pumping in investment from semiconductors to artificial intelligence. So it's re-emerging, the whole economy is re-emerging from a multi-decade-long hibernation, with multiple government initiatives that held back share valuations starting to reverse course for both Japanese shares and the yen, right? When determining what necessarily can come of this, right, or how to invest in this, many analysts and investors look at the iShares MSCI Japan ETF, the EWJ, right, the ticker symbol here, highlighting that it traded at a 15x multiple, right, compared to its 26x earnings multiple of the S&P 500. So, however, the biggest risk is government bodies start to lose confidence in its policy pivots. The reason that include wage inflation not taking hold like it's currently anticipated. So you can see a very strong run in the iShares here. We haven't necessarily crossed some of these larger pops that we've seen from 2021, but we're making a very, very strong resurgence in this. In other news, right, we have the Fed, the FOMC meeting minutes were released yesterday. It's not necessarily a rate decision event, which is going to come in March, but we didn't really get too much craziness out of it. A lot of the movement came from NVDA and the anticipated movement of NVIDIA. Most Federal Reserve policymakers highlighted the risk of moving too quickly to ease policy, according to the minutes that we saw from the January 30 to 31st meeting, with a minority feeling that keeping policy too restrictive could tip the economy into recession. Right? There was no discussion on when rates might get cut, but policymakers noted the importance of monitoring data to see whether inflation continues to move towards that Fed's 2% goal. Perhaps most importantly, members agreed that the Federal Reserve's fund rate is likely to be at its peak for this tightening cycle, and the FOMC also discussed the process of reducing the size of the central bank's balance sheet. So with that, right, we didn't necessarily see too much movement, but the probabilities that we see a March rate cut is going to be, well, it's very, very low right now, right? It's dropped significantly from what we've seen over a month ago. I believe it was hovering around 70%. Now the expectations are about, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, about 90% chance that we see rates stay the same in March as well. When it comes down to the S&P 500 futures here, we're back into the all-time high. The all-time high had a lot of stuck traders on the long side into that 66 prior to this move, and we're kind of hovering around that. I'm not necessarily saying that this is the market to fade. You start trying to sell into this and try to capture the massive reversal from an all-time high. But after such a insane pump, realistically, we're up over 100 points from yesterday's low in just a session and a bit, right? Realistically, it wasn't 2 full sessions that created this. The overnight movement, right, we hopped back above that 50-20 level, and we've just been skyrocketing ever since. So seeing some kind of sell side try to open this up isn't necessarily out of the question, but a general target is 5110, right? 5110 is a decent target to the upside, but I'd like to see if these guys can sell this. Realistically, I would like to be a buyer closer to that like 49 area below, and that mid 30 on the S&P holds some kind of major support. But I don't necessarily see these guys holding out this massive upside move that well off the opening print, so I could see a little more profit-taking pullback on this, and we'll see how NVIDIA generally reacts to these markets and this market movement. So that's my general plan for today. That's what I'm going to be looking at. 30x forward earnings. The massive upside momentum move, right? Some of you guys are saying in the comments, realistically, the buying into this high right now, it's going to be difficult for me to do as well. Even if I'm not trying to sell this immediately into these all-time highs, I'd rather be a buyer or see if we can get some buy side to the downside. If we just start bidding right off the open, you're kind of left with very little chance to kind of figure things out. You're probably just going to have to bid this. But the way I see this, it's very difficult right now. We're up 100 points. I would rather watch this and wait to see if some guys try to pull this down. Realistically, I don't think it's super probable that we sustain this massive pop right off the open and hold it for the remainder of the day. That's what Fridays are for. So that's that, right? Why is the U.S. market not moving? Because it opens in about, well, the futures markets are open, but the cash market opens in about 18 minutes. So let's open up our live futures trading room. I'll see you guys in there. Let's do this again tomorrow to wrap up the week, and I hope everyone has an amazing trading day. Trade carefully as we come into all-time highs after a session in a few hours, so just keep that in mind. Tread lightly, right, and be responsible with the trading. A lot of accounts were blown out yesterday.